Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. Sorry for the delay, everyone. Technical difficulties, but we have it up and running right now. And if there should be any problem, let us know. We'll have an eye on the stream, but we were experiencing a lot more technical difficulties than usual. So if there is something and we don't catch it, let us know in the chat and we will try to fix it live. But tonight is the kind of pre-stream for the week next week, as usual. Uh, or as I mentioned last week, excuse me, I'm going out of town, so won't be here next week. So we wanted to do a stream early before I head out. The next couple weeks will be a little different. They will be up to Sanak. I won't not be there for the next 2 weeks as well. So it'll be up to Sanak if he wants to stream or not. Keep an eye on the channel for that in the post section. Community is now changed to post. If you guys are not aware of that, it's now been rechanged. So, or the name has been changed. So keep an eye on posts. We'll post there if there's a stream going up. And obviously, if you don't see it in the lives on the Tuesdays that we usually stream, then it probably isn't going to be happening. So we will try to let you know as soon as possible whether those streams will be happening. The next stream will also not be on a Tuesday that I will be a part of. It will actually be on Thursday, March 6th. So keep an eye out for that. We will be going live for sure that week. But yeah, going out of town. We'll be gone for a few weeks. And so that's changing our schedule. But this will be a traditional stream as always. This will be the 1.5 to 2 hour long show where we take your guys' questions, your comments, anything you would like to discuss about Star Wars or any topic whatsoever. It's an Ask Us Anything. So ask us anything you want in the chats here, and we will answer it as quickly as we can on stream. As per usual, 2 ways to guarantee your chats get on the stream. There's first super chats, and in any type of super chat, any type of any dollar amount that is right for you, and we will answer it immediately on the stream. The other way is to join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs. If you're of a certain tier, you will get a post in your feed that will show you the link to the stream. Just type in your question there, and I will keep refreshing that throughout the night, and we will bring it up live. If you would not like to participate in one of those programs, regular chat is great. We go first come, first serve from the top to the bottom. So we'll be running our way through the chat or across the entire night, as well as a couple other news stories. We always talk about some news here for Star Wars first. So we're going to break down a few pieces of news that happened since our last show on Tuesday. And there have been a few cool things that have come out here in the last few days or so since we last streamed. So we're going to run those down. And if you have a chat or a comment or anything that you would like to say in regards to that specific topic, we will bring yours up into the conversation while we talk about that topic. So topical questions get answered a little bit first. And then after that, everything else will be in the main chat. All right, so let's get into our first topic. And this one actually broke, I believe, the day after we streamed the other day. But it was rumored for a while or previously announced or leaked or something back in December that the Bad Batch Sanctuary was going to be a book coming out this year. It was never officially announced, so we never covered it. But now it is official. StarWars.com has revealed that Star Wars Sanctuary, a Bad Batch novel written by Lamar Giles, will be set during the events of the Bad Batch Season 2, and specifically after the events of the tsunami disaster in the episode Pabu. It's going to be coming out August 5th, and it is a full-on adult novel. So this is a pretty exciting book. As you can see, it's following the Bad Batch specifically in that time, so there won't be any Crosshair part of the story unless we get to Crosshair's perspective in a different part of the narrative, but it is focusing on our 4 characters that we had in the Bad Batch at that point: Hunter, Wrecker, Tech, and Omega. So this is prior to, spoiler for everybody who hasn't watched Bad Batch Season 2, prior to Tech dying. So this is going to be an interesting book. I think we will get, for the first time in canon, perspectives of the clones, which will be interesting to get in their heads. Really, they've been such a big part of animation and a lot of the storytelling we've experienced in Star Wars for the last 15 years or so, but we haven't gotten in their heads since Legends. And now we're going to get in their heads for the first time, really get to see their perspective, and I really love this cover as well for the Bad Batch novel. So Nick, when you hear there's a Bad Batch novel coming out, when you hear it's about the Bad Batch specifically during the show in season 2, what are your thoughts about where this novel takes place and just that we're getting a Bad Batch centric novel?
Yeah, I'm thinking for the most part, pretty excited. It's kind of interesting that compared to any other commandos that we followed, any other notable clones, the Bad Batch have kind of grown into this little arc that turned into this big group that at one point seemed like they're gonna have a show that was centered about the clone rebellion and everything, kind of streamlined a little bit more to focus on their family dynamics and all that. So if you're gonna make that choice, make sure that there's a payoff for it, right? So I'm pretty pleased. I think the only downside is that more than likely it's not going to be the entire crew of the Bad Batch, right? There's always going to be one person missing. I wonder if we get some POVs just to kind of fill up some of that. I doubt it, but yeah, I mean, like you said, it looks like a pretty nice cover, like a little bit more of an art style instead of just like floating heads. So I think that definitely warms me up to it. Uh, any kind of, like, quasi Clone Wars tie-in novel sort of stuff that we can get in 2025 after the show has ended, that makes me pretty happy. So, I think if you were around, the Star Wars fandom at this point last year when we were actively watching Bad Batch Season 3, for the most part, I think everyone was really enjoying themselves. I think it was just a healthy time. So, anytime I get to re-experience something with the Bad Batch, I usually remember how fun it was, and I'm sure that the Bad Batch fans on Twitter, on Blue Sky, everywhere else, they're super excited because one of the healthiest fandoms within the Star Wars fandom. So, I think any story is great news. So, just excited. Just truly really super excited for it, and I wonder if it could lead to, like, stuff that's more of a bridge into that Imperial era now that we've kind of gotten that epilogue with Omega all grown up and everything. I don't know for sure if that's really, like, a market viable thing to do, but I'm hoping for the best. I think this could be a pretty sound success for Star Wars Publishing, so, yeah, just hope that the story is there to also match it.
I hope so too. I think when I originally heard about the leaks for this book, I was pretty excited because I want more clone centric stories. Really have enjoyed Republic Commando and a lot of the other things that are clone centric from Legends, even if it is a very, very different clone perspective than we're used to with canon or with Filoni's Star Wars with the 3D animated Star Wars. So I really wanted to see what canon would do with clone perspectives. The biggest disappointment, though, is the fact that it takes place right smack dab in the middle of season
Yeah.
2, like, not even after the last episode, like, not between season 2 and season 3. It's right before the finale of season 2, and so one of the things that sucks about that is just the fact that you know what's where it's all gonna go, like, it's gonna be kind of a circular story. Nothing's gonna happen to these members of the Bad Batch, nothing's gonna happen to Fee, nothing's gonna happen to any of the main characters, so how is, Lamar Giles going to be able to get us connected to the extra new characters that he's going to have to introduce, and how are we
Mhm.
going to be truly excited about a Bad Batch journey that takes place in between a couple episodes that didn't really like, when you watch those episodes, doesn't really seem like there's that much time between them. It feels like it's
Yeah.
a pretty quick build from like, "Oh, the Pabu disaster," to, "All right, now we have the final mission." So yeah, I think it's a really strange placement. It's also really strange that this is coming out now, like over a year after season 3 ends, when season 2 ended over 2 years ago. So it's just kind of like this would be the type of thing that you would think would have come out right after season 2 ended, right in the midst of the fee tech hype, because the story, for those of you who haven't seen the synopsis, is basically that Fee, who you might remember, voiced by Wanda Sykes, right?
Yep.
In Bad Batch. She is a treasure hunter, kind of a pirate scoundrel treasure hunter, and she is taking the Bad Batch on yet another mission. And in the show, in season 2, one of the bigger character development things is that Tech has a semi relationship with Fee. She likes him, and he is in his own Tech way trying to show his affection back. So I'm sure there will be some great moments, some great character moments with that type of storyline. But just in general, the kind of hype from that relationship, the shipping, if you will, of that relationship from back then in 2023, it's long gone. So it just seems like this would have been something way
Yeah.
better to do back then. So I'm a little baffled by the overall decision to make this novel and to make this novel at this point. Like, I would have much preferred a Bad Batch novel that took place after the show, between the end of the show and the little epilogue we get with adult Omega at the end of the show. Like, I would have loved to see something there, or maybe this is the pre-show Bad Batch, and we've got Crosshair, we've got a true Clone Wars war story. Like, to me, there's so many cool ideas you can do with the Bad Batch, but this is just super random. So I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping this better than it sounds. Like, the cover looks great, but to me, it just sounds like this classic kind of Star Wars canon. Let's fill a gap that we don't need to, just to write a book type of deal. It's not it's not something anyone's been asking for. It's not a story that anybody's really been wanting, but they're going to write it anyways. And so that's where it really gets hard for me to get too excited about this. We'll be reading it. We'll have our review out probably day of for this
Yeah.
book, and I hope it's great. Maybe this is the type of book too that I think it could be better if it's shorter, a little faster paced, more exciting, more action, some decent character
Yeah.
beats, but it doesn't have to be this dragged out, long, in-depth story. I think this could just be a fun summer read, and I think it would work much better than if they really try to turn it into some Bad Batch magnum opus. But we will see. Let us know what your guys' thoughts are on the Bad Batch Sanctuary. It is coming out, like I said earlier, on August 5th. So that's our first novel that we have found out about for the second half of 2025, which is also a big thing. We will have our review out for The Mask of Fear, the new Reign of the Empire, first book of that trilogy that's starting this year by Alexander Freed. We'll have that out for you pretty soon. Just finished the book today. So we're excited to talk about that. We'll probably get that in about a week or so, week, 2 weeks. So starting off with Star Wars books already here in 2025. We're already kicking it into high gear. Couple comments on the Bad Batch. Ovier says, I haven't watched the Bad Batch yet and haven't seen everything else and have seen everything else. Is it worth it? I would say it's worth it if you like animation. If you liked Clone Wars or you liked Rebels,
Yeah.
it's a high quality show. It's not quite as good as those two, I would say, because the stories for those two are just so much bigger, so much grander, so much more epic. And I think that was one of the disappointments with the Bad Batch is you watch season 1 and you feel like the story is going to be really big, really important. And then the other 2 seasons don't really play out that way. But if you know you're getting into a little smaller scale show about a clone family, a clone unit, post Order 66, post Revenge of the Sith, excuse me, I think you will enjoy it immensely. It's a fast-paced, shorter show than the other 2, so I recommend it.
Yeah, I would say pretty much the same thing. I don't know if it's a novel that will like I said, will tie into a show that is like super big and impactful and eventful in the way that you're thinking about when you think of Rebels and Clone Wars. That was one of those things, especially with season 2 after how much season 1 did right, that you're like, "Oh, it's kind of just really about their family dynamic and, like, their initial struggles as their own unique fit amongst the clones." So, it does seem like it was a show that meant to be more, and then it wasn't. So, that's kinda probably why, like Liam pointed out, it's a little harder to be as excited, I guess, for where the show is ultimately gonna go sorry, where this novel is gonna go within the span of the season 2, especially since season 2's got this weird kind of frame where it feels like it's super long, but how realistically long are the gaps in the season, even if it is arguably taking over the longest period of time, amongst the 3 seasons, so it's still worth watching. It's a very solid, like, B tier animation show. It feels like this is where Star Wars animation should be if they're not trying to drive like a big part of the era like Clone Wars and Rebels did. This is good, right? This should be a nice baseline. You shouldn't really have Resistance as your baseline, but unfortunately, there is something that is far, far less appealing of a show compared to Bad Batch. But Bad Batch, if it didn't have the Clone Wars or Rebels to look up to, I think you'd have a great time with it. It's just having watched those, especially
Yeah.
over time, over the decade, and then you come into it, and then how it kicks off with those first 3 episodes, and then season 2 is a lot more about, like, the middle chapter, like, how do you get to that final act, which itself is not as big as we all assumed it was gonna be. Yeah, it really comes down to if you just enjoy Star Wars, you're gonna have a great time. If you're looking for it to be big and massive, and therefore this novel also have a huge, like, nice way of expanding things out, we might not be really getting that, but, yeah, it's still good Star Wars.
Over here also said, "Where did you get that beautiful sweater?" I don't know. I can't remember. I've had this for a really long time. Kind of forgot about it and saw it in my closet the other day and was like, "Oh yeah, I've never worn that on the show." So now you're seeing it a few shows in a row because it is very cold where I live right now. Skywalker's Academy says, "What do you consider worth it?" Okay, that's in response to OVR. Father Karras says the animation for Bad Batch is gorgeous, better than the Clone Wars and Rebels. More details, Skywalker's Academy says. And then Father Karras says we might get some more development for Tech and Fee that could make their goodbye hit even harder. But yeah, timing is weird. Definitely agree. I think it's a very strange place to set this book. Like when it was announced, I thought it, or I just assumed it was going to be a Clone Wars story until the news came the other day. I figured that's the best place to go because then you can include Crosshair. But
Yeah.
alas, we are not doing that. But yeah, let us know what you guys think. I did put out a poll, and 13 people have voted in it so far. 69% say they're going to read the Bad Batch Sanctuary novel this summer. So hopefully you guys enjoy it when you get to check it out. Let's go into another piece of news here that we didn't get to cover last week, but it is pretty exciting. We did mention it briefly, but let's go into the full story here tonight. And that's going to be that Star Wars finally, for the first time, has its own original manga that's not connected to the High Republic initiative or an adaptation of one of the movies, like we have seen in the past. Path of the Lightsaber, the manga takes place during the sequel trilogy, does tie in with the High Republic, uh, but it is its own unique new story with new characters. So the story will be written by Kenny Ruiz and takes place shortly after the events of The Last Jedi, following a young scavenger named Nyoka, the dream of becoming a Jedi and stumbling upon a lightsaber while exploring the ruins of a ship from the High Republic. From there, their life is turned upside down as they soon learn that others are also after the lightsaber. They'll have to learn how to wield it on the run. So this was announced right at the beginning or end of last week. I can't remember around the time. It was one of our smaller stories for our last stream. We didn't get to quite cover it, but yeah, pretty exciting. We got a Star Wars manga. Makes sense. We've talked about this year how Star Wars Celebration, it is in Japan. So that you would assume would mean there would be some content that would be crossing over with Japanese culture, and specifically two of the art forms that are most popular, at least here and globally, with Japanese pop culture is manga and anime. So with the rise of manga and anime, it only makes sense Star Wars has tried to dabble in manga a little bit these last few years with the 4 going on 5 volumes of the Higher Republic Edge of Balance. Star Wars has been involved in manga for a long time. We did have the original adaptations of A New Hope, The Phantom Menace, all of the original trilogy. We did have some short stories that were manga only releases in Japan, and we got a Rebels manga. So we've had some
Yeah.
manga here and there. We've got some adaptations of some books like Lost Stars, but this is really our first thing that we've gotten that has not been tied to a major initiative like the High Republic, even though it does have High Republic connections, and has not been an adaptation of a book or a movie or something else. So, Sonic, when you heard that we're getting Path of the Lightsaber, what were your thoughts?
It was a big surprise. I think I was assuming that, the Legacy of Vader comic would be kind of the only sort of publishing move that they'd go for with, you know, art and, original art, original story. Like, yeah, I assumed comics would lead the way. Maybe we might get like a sequel to Lost Stars for the 10th anniversary of the 2015 run of the initiative of Journey to the Force Awakens. Like I just figure like, yeah, we got our big heavy hitter there. But one huge thing that's necessary, and I'm glad this is a good, strong first step, is that episode 7 and episode 8 are back to back. 8 and 9 get a nice little 1 year gap. It will never truly be Clone Wars-esque, but you can do something and by fleshing out, building out the galaxy, the world, that's you can you have to spin off a lot of what happens in 7 and 8 as, like, these are sudden back-to-back events, like it is in the film's chronology, and then how does everybody react? Like, nobody's had a chance for the first big thing, the whole Star Killer base destruction. The second thing is like, okay, it's like the Resistance almost was knocked out in 2, 3 days, basically. Now that it's not, what happens, right? So, Legacy Vader, handle all that Kylo stuff. He might be haunted, all that. I haven't had a chance to read the first issue, but I've heard good things. This is an example of story that, okay, now we're fleshing out the galaxy and its inhabitants and people who are dealing with the consequences of these films that happen back to back, where there is nothing of even like a 6 month gap. It's just days. You don't think the galaxy isn't like freaked out and messed up? You don't think the First Order isn't taking advantage of, like, the Resistance just surviving right now? We don't even know if they're 100% established on Agent Class right now, like, there's so many things that can happen in those first few weeks, and this is where new characters and original characters get to shine because they can reflect on everything that's happened in the films and still do things that are like reflective of like, hey, the First Order maybe now be occupying more and more like it is in the Resistance TV show. Okay, here's a High Republic connection to continue building this different bridges between eras. This is exactly what's needed here to just continue to elevate the sequel trilogy as an era instead of just three films. So massively excited. I like the art. I like that they're not shying away from like manga isms and anime isms where you could kind of have character faces like go big and large and like simplistic at times when like they're very silly and running away, but they still look like they have a good art style for more of the serious moments and all that. So I think this will be the first time that we'll see a manga kind of be a little bit more traditionalist to like Japanese audiences expectations. If you read like Edge of Balance, it's pretty good, but it is very much a manga drawn with like a comic sensibility in mind. I think what just from the promo art that they give of Path of the Lightsaber seems like there's going to be a little bit more dynamism. There's going to be a little bit more in the hands of the mangaka themselves to really dictate where the story goes. And we've already got visions, so people are kind of used to like having a little bit more of a Japanese voice directly creating Star Wars. I'm sure that there's going to be oversight from Lucasfilm Story Group, so they can't just go off the rails. But yeah, flesh out this era, flesh out that 1 year gap, have original characters that can show up wherever else they want to, maybe in American comics. And yeah, this is a good, strong first step. I hope to see this be like a really well received manga.
I hope it is too. I mean, it sounds cool. We need more content in the sequel era to continue to help that flesh that out, give it many different sides because really one of the big things with the sequel era, one of the reasons I feel like it does feel so much more lacking than all the other ones. It's not just the lack of content, but the lack of the world building. We
Yeah.
always complained about the world building in the sequel trilogy, and you don't get really anybody's perspectives who's not part of the main conflict. You don't see what the First Order is doing to the rest of the galaxy from really anyone in right
Yeah.
now in the sequel trilogy. So it'll be nice to see a little bit more of the off-world perspective, out of the conflict perspective. No Rey, no Finn, no Poe, no Leia, no Luke, nobody like that who's involved in the conflict. Now we get somebody else's perspective, and I think that'll be nice. I do expect from the art for this it to be a little bit more fun, a little bit more kid friendly, more of a comedy anime, a comedy mixed with action, like you were mentioning. Edge of Balance is much more serious. It's more straightforward. Some of the characters a little harder to relate to because they are, you know, mostly just stoic Jedi.
Yeah.
So I think this looks like it's going to add a little bit more of that whimsy to it. That should be fun. I think one of the things that is a little disappointing to me is I don't know anything about Kenny Ruiz, but just the fact that this is a manga not written by somebody from Japan to me is like, okay, we're getting our first step here to get a manga, but it's not a Japanese manga really.
Yeah.
Is this just using the form to sell and capitalize on the popularity of manga, or is this actually like a, a full manga? I would love to see them get some of the popular Japanese comic creators, some of the popular manga creators in Japan to actually get on board and get it hyped to make their own Star Wars, because I would love to just see those original ideas come through, even if they put the Visions label on it and just said it was not canon. That's fine. I would like to
Yeah.
see more and more manga creators get a shot at making Star Wars, just like we're getting to see Visions return to Japanese animation this year too. So uh, overall excited, but hoping this is the first step of much, much more. What do you guys think? I put out a poll. Are you guys going to read The Path of the Lightsaber manga? And the majority of you, two-thirds of you, are saying no, not interested in Path of the Lightsaber. But that's fair. Not manga is not for everybody, and it is certainly an acquired taste. But it is really fun if you're interested in something that's more kind of right in between comic strips of like the newspaper comic strips and what a comic book in America would be. Manga is often in that realm, especially something a little more entertaining and fun like this. So I think this will be quite a good a good thing for us to get. Yeah, Sonic, I'll pass it over to you. What were you? We have Star Wars Podcast Day coming up. What Talk to our audience a little bit more about that, and then we'll get into our final story here, and then discuss the rest of the questions and comments in the chat.
Yeah, so as you guys may or may not have known, we've been kind of part of this initiative that's been run by this really awesome dude that we met at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim. And what he does is he kind of brings together all the podcasts that have kind of kicked off their love of Star Wars fandom and like discussions with guys like you, whether it be on YouTube, uh, whether it be on Spotify, Apple, whatever platform, right? And I know many of you guys know we were podcast hosts for Mando season two, but then we transitioned to YouTube, so that we become a little bit more of a YouTube channel with a podcast slant, right? We love doing these lives. This is kind of how we keep that original podcast format going, but now we have even more friends to enjoy it with. But technically, it we kinda release every year, an episode that gets attached to Star Wars Podcast Day. It is, I believe, started in '97 or something like that. I don't remember the exact time, but the first podcast started on February 7th in the '90s, and it was called Jedi Talks, and Star Wars podcasting has been around forever, basically. So we're one of the few that has, the few I say, but one of the many that started off doing their own podcast. And we like always kind of contributing and telling you guys a little bit more of the history about that. And this is like a cool thing. So if you see our posts in the next once the socials updated, talking about Star Wars Podcast Day, maybe you're watching this on replay. That's kind of what this is about. We started off as podcasters, and now we're a YouTube channel that kind of keeps it going like this. So it's a fun little thing. We just want to make a little shout out to it. And if you hear other creators have hashtag Star Wars Podcast Day or Star Wars Podcast Day in their video or their podcast episode, go check it out because they're all part of the same initiative. And having checked out some of these other ones, they're all really great. So enjoy Star Wars Podcast Day. This is our contribution to it for 2025.
Great. Yeah, it is a really cool initiative to be a part of, and we were included in it all the way back when we were, nobodies to now having a fairly decent sized Star Wars channel and having a community of people we love to discuss Star Wars with. So it is a fun initiative that houses all different types of Star Wars channels and podcasters. So definitely check it out if you haven't. All right, the last story we're going to get into before we start focusing on your guys' questions and comments. So again, if you're watching right now and you want to ask us anything you want, send it into the chat. It is an open Q&A. So ask us anything you would like, and then we will get to it after this story. It can be about any topic, doesn't have to be Star Wars related. But if you have something Star Wars related, send it into the chat, and we will get to it as soon as we can. All right, so next story, something that's been going around for a little bit here, is the constant discussion and rumors about it. Does Skeleton Crew have a season 2 confirmed? Have they greenlit season 2 of Skeleton Crew? Is it coming? Well, that answer still hasn't been confirmed. We still don't know if there's a Skeleton Crew season 2 coming, but at least you can be a little bit more positive if you're interested in a Skeleton Crew season 2 because the creator Jon Watts of Skeleton Crew does have plans and an outline and pretty much everything in mind for the direction he would take Skeleton Crew season 2 if it were to get that green light. So, speaking with some outlets, Jon Watts confirmed that yes, while Skeleton Crew season 1 was more about the kids discovering space and getting out there and really just getting a chance to be a part of the larger galaxy, now it's time for Atten to figure out what's its place in the larger galaxy. If you've seen Skeleton Crew's finale, you know that the barrier was opened and the New Republic comes and helps save the day. And Atten is now out there for everybody to discuss and be a part of its wealth and status and power. And is it going to join the New Republic? And all these questions were left unanswered when the final episode aired. And so one of the quotes from Jon Watts is that what's so fun about my plans for season 2 is that Atten has lost its protective nests, its childhood. The planet gets to be an awkward teenager, and the parents have to grow up as well, which is an interesting wrinkle to the concept we explored in the first season. So, those are some of the ideas Jon Watts has, getting the parents more involved, getting the politicians of Atten more involved, getting everybody really a part of the small world we got to see in season 1 into the broader galaxy. Now, I think this makes, a lot of sense obviously for the direction where we go based on the cliffhangers they leave at the end of season 1, based on the on the fact that this show has been continuously advertised to be a part of this Mandalorian timeline, this New Republic era. And the only way for us to really get that show a part of that era is to start tying in Skeleton Crew with the rest of the world. Now, for those of you who do like Skeleton Crew, some of the reasons I've seen a lot of people say they like it is because it's different. It's its own thing. It's not tied and bogged down by everything else going on. So I think it's a double-edged sword. If you open up the galaxy, it could, yes, lead to more cameos and more connectivity and take a little bit away from what the Skeleton Crew was about. But on the flip side, then you might have an adventure that's a little bit more important. It's a little bit grander, a little bit larger, a little bit bigger. Sonic, when you hear Jon Watts's ideas for Skeleton Crew season 2, what are your thoughts on the direction they might ultimately take it?
Yeah, I think to me, it comes off that Watts and Ford, just like season one, had a very specific, concrete plan in mind, and season two is no different, right? I like a lot of the verbiage being used, yet Atten kind of has to go through its own teenage, adolescent phase. The parents kind of have to go through that. I assume that doesn't really mean that the kids won't, because we've heard even if we get a season two, they're going to be aged up. We're going to be a few years into the timeline. Maybe that's what ironically sets a clear example for like, hey, how many years has the Mandoverse actually been going on instead of everything's just in 9 ABY, right? Like now, probably because of this show, if we get a season two, we'll get like a nice concrete, like, hey, it's now 12 ABY. And we're in the back half of everything kind of going on here or something, right? So, yeah, I think it'll be pretty funny seeing this be the show that could be there for the timeline, but also they're saying all the right things. I'm really pleased about everything I'm hearing. I think no matter what, if these kids do show up in other things like animation and all that, I don't mind that. But at Atten has to still be explored. The at system has to still be explored. That was always kind of the thing that we felt like, are we missing it? Like, are we? Is that purposely like something that got cut out for season one that had a little bit more of a role to play, maybe with the parent storyline in episodes like 5 through 7 or something? I don't know, right? But and I wouldn't even say the episodes felt like they're cut to the bone in some ways. It just felt like they were shorter when they could have been a little longer and fleshed out those details. So yeah, I think a season two a little bit more focused on that, letting it be its own pocket universe in a universe that was kind of started off as a one-off, as its own pocket universe, is a great idea. I think if we have any add references to the other stuff like an Ahsoka or the Mandalorian and Grogu, and maybe it's sequels or something, it should be more of like, okay, like this is an example of a planet struggling with like the New Republic assimilating it in, right? It's struggling to like handle its stuff, and there's some mysteries that we have to like kind of deal with that are now being unraveled now that they're in this position, right? So it really does remind me of something like a very iconic anime like Gurren Lagann, where that first half of the story you think you've done it, like, everything's great, you solved the day, but then the supposed enemy is like, "I've been kinda holding things at bay." Now you have to live with your consequences. You have to live with what comes next, the things that I've been holding back, right? The lawful evil of some sorts, right? I'd love to see if there are things that now with the AT system all finally no longer, like, under some sort of control or all kind of falling apart in a different way between each planet. I wonder if there's some safeguards or some ideas that we're supposed to now kickstart into place if we know that every single planet's been lost. How do we recover it? Maybe there's a way to bring it all back to its own secluded way. Like there could be some really, really interesting connections between the planets, between the citizens, a little bit more of the history of why there's only certain aliens and the humans here, like a little bit more about the High Republic, possibly Old Republic connections. Go inward. There's so much to explore there. Let the parents get proper arcs. Yeah, a lot of cool stuff can happen here. So I'm excited. I think we're in a good place for a season two. Now the question is this a show that based on Nielsen is going to be growing or staying steady after its final couple episodes are finally charted? And if it does, yeah, I think maybe they're saying this because they're confident that it's going to continue, and maybe it'll just be the final season or something. Who knows? But I think there's a lot of ideas for this to still at least continue in animation or books if we never get a live action season 2.
Yeah, I when it comes to should Skeleton Crew get a season 2, that's up for debate. Like, I think, the ratings weren't great, but the ratings across the board last year were not great for Disney Plus. I know there was this story that came out either today or yesterday that they lost a lot of subscribers in the last quarter of the year, almost a million subscribers, but that they were still profitable because of the price hikes. So I'm not really sure where they're sitting. Do they prefer just having a profit or do they prefer having more subscribers? Is that related directly to the price hikes or is that related to the quality of the programming? I think they have to take in all of those things into consideration, but obviously the loss in subscribers is going to directly affect the viewership for Skeleton Crew. So whereas, not to compare it to the Acolyte, but to compare it to the Acolyte had possibly about 700,000 more people subscribed to Disney Plus who could have watched it than had the Skeleton Crew had. So, do they take that into consideration when they're trying to decide whether they want to pick a season 2 for Skeleton Crew? I think there's a lot of interesting conversation around that. And I'm usually an advocate too for just saying, okay, is this show a high enough quality to give it one more shot at
Yeah,
growing viewership? And I think Skeleton Crew, especially when compared to the rest of the stuff they've made in the last, 5, 6 years, is definitely in that mid to upper tier of quality for across the board of Disney Plus stuff. So I think if just based on quality, I think it's worth trying. And then in as a kind of devil's advocate thing for those people who don't think that you should do a season 2 that's more open, that's less about the kids, that's more about the politics, more about the parents, more about that type of stuff. I do think that when you have a show featuring kids, you have to evolve and you have to change. They're gonna grow up. They're naturally gonna grow up. I mean, at best, right, we're going to get a Skeleton Crew season 2 by, like, probably similar window, December, November 2026 at the absolute earliest, and most likely it'll be 2027 if they announced it. Let's
yeah,
say they announce it
yeah,
Celebration, they would have to be going into production this year to get it in 2026 at all. And that also depends on when Ahsoka's coming out. If Ahsoka is a second half of the year show, then they're probably not going to release Skeleton Crew till 2027. So there's a lot of things up in the air. When you wait that long, the kids are going to grow up. You're going to have to change kind of what the show's about. They might be in an age where it makes a little bit more sense for them to be the ones leading expeditions or going out and into the galaxy and less so, kids, but they still have that group dynamic. So similar to how Stranger Things had to adapt and change as the kids grow up, you have to adapt and change with this show. So it's not always going to be about the kids being lost and not knowing how to do things. The show is going to have to change with that. And I think this is a decent direction to go in. Uh, Hopefully, adding more parents doesn't subtract from the kids, but actually makes the episodes longer so that you can have two different storylines going on. But mostly, I think we all want a season 2 just to find out what happens with Jod. I think they need to finish that character's arc. I'd love to see that character be a part of the grander picture. I think Jude Law's Jod was a really fun character, really interesting and very scary at times. So I'm really hoping that we get a second chance to continue to flesh out this story. I don't think it's the best thing that Disney Plus has made. It probably wouldn't be in my top 3 or 4 shows they've done for Star Wars, but it wouldn't be in my bottom 3 or 4. So, I think it's right there in the middle, and it's good enough to try it again if they want to if they want to give it a go for a
Mhm.
new type of Skeleton Crew story. They just really need to figure out what they're doing with this whole era on TV first, and I think that's one of the big holdups, but hopefully a big announcement at Celebration could possibly clear up a lot of those details. But let us know what you guys think. I put up a poll here asking, do you guys think Skeleton Crew should get a season 2? Right now, 89% of you are saying yes. Only 11% say no. So most of you seem to enjoy Skeleton Crew as well. Father Karras says, suspect there will be a segment of the at and pop that represents the Skeleton Crew families uh, for changing their way of life sanctuary from the chaos of the GFFA. What's the GFFA? Am I missing
Galaxy
something?
far, far away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I like that. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the more interesting parts of now their allegiance. If they go that route to the New Republic, right? Is that you have this ultra wealthy planet. What does it mean for the New Republic? What does it mean for the Thrawn threat? Does he need the credits? I think all of that needs to play into the story at large at some point. Now, it doesn't mean they have to do a season 2 to explain a lot of that, but I think there's a lot of rich material there that could definitely play into maybe a little bit more sophisticated season 2. Not that you want to lose the fun, but something
Mhm.
that's a little bit more grounded, a little bit more rich in Star Wars lore rather than just kids on the run, pirates chasing them.
Yeah, I think it is something that I've suspected a little bit because I mean, the parents they don't give us a lot, let's be honest, but they do give some very interesting tidbits about like how this is something that the kids would have found out about this true nature of and when they all like were of age, right? Once they'd finished their schooling and kind of been slotted into the life and the path that was meant for them to maintain the system, right? So I think we're going to definitely see if we get a season two, a little bit of the repercussions of that current system and how they were able to survive or thrive. However the reality is definitely unfolded out there. Uh, Past that, we have to also consider how do these parents of like move forward? Are they all going to stay on the planet? Or are some of them getting like poached by the New Republic? Like, oh, like you've got such great skills. This could be really useful for our Treasury Department or office admin. I don't know. There could be some of the parents, like finally that we see from the Skeleton Crew parents. Half of them go, and half of them stay. Right. I think it'd be really interesting if we'd have Wim's father, Wendell, kind of go to Coruscant, and then Ferns, she's the one like who expects to kind of go, but then they're like, we don't really have much need for like your sort of like administrative role. But this guy, a level 7 technician, like, oh man, like that's what we need right now, especially with like what we know from Mando season 3, where they're reusing a lot of Imperial tech. They're kind of transitioning over. How do we make things clean and solid for themselves? How do we get this bureaucracy up and running, right? And he seems like more of a guy who could fit in that situation than honestly what we'd get from Farah, right? So I think that'd be pretty interesting to see uncovered and developed. And if other parents, other new characters, and maybe early teenagers or early adults who are expecting their life path to kind of be set, and then they're suddenly like, oh, that doesn't work anymore. I'd love to see like those ages kind of be brought into play, and that's why the parents feel so much more stuck because they don't have that same immediate pivot. They're not the same youth as like their children are, who slightly older, younger, whoever they might be, to like make those changes. They're still getting an education. They're still having fun. They're like other kids, but now they have the whole galaxy to like roam and explore if the New Republic helps them out. The parents, they might be limited in a lot of ways. So I think that'll be a really cool thing to see. And I'd love to see if even the parents of the Skeleton Crew kids kind of look at them like, oh man, what did they do? Like, we get like maybe this is what had to happen, but it's all because they jumped in that ship. Now our lives are forever changed, right? Like I'd love to see some kind of grayer situations with those kids and the consequences of what they started off with, right? I don't know if they'll
Mhm.
necessarily handle most of that like dramatic beats, but they could definitely like be like, oh my god, like our parents don't love us. Let's hop into our next adventure of exploring a little bit more of like adding secondary systems and levels that we don't know about that could at least keep our at systems all together and provide a way for our families, our civilizations to actually like work and thrive together instead of just being used and scavenged in so many ways by the New Republic or Proto First Order or whoever's out there. So a lot of story potential, really, and I think that's why you could reuse a lot of sets. You could use Mando stuff. A season two on a lower budget on sets that you've already kind of created is very
Mhm.
doable. It's really just aging up the kids.
And if they were able to find a way to shoot a lot of this stuff at the same time, you could save a lot of money, right? Like
Yeah.
if you crisscrossed between Mandalorian and Skeleton Crew and Ahsoka and all these different things that you're shooting in the same time period, similar eras, similar sets, you could save money there, and then you could have your stuff spread out throughout the year. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see because I'm not exactly sure the ages of the children that they cast, but they weren't super old, but now they're in that
Teenage.
stage where,
Yeah.
they're gonna change a lot over, like, 5 years, so how do they craft the story to fit those changes? It'll be interesting to see what they decide to do and how they keep that same tone. But let us know what you guys think in the comments. We're gonna go into the comment section now and focus on a lot of your guys' chats to go through the rest of tonight's live. So make sure you keep sending in your questions, your comments, your theories about anything you would like. Doesn't have to be Star Wars related. It can be about anything you'd like to discuss. So send it into the chat and we will discuss it. We have a few more stories we can run down if we need more content. So let us know if there's something specific that you guys heard about this week that you'd like to discuss, and we will bring it up on the chat. All right, so let's start at the top here. We have Anthony Tiff who says, "This is a pleasant surprise. Just saw this on my notifications feed. Wanted to say a quick hello as I got college things to take care of, but I hope to see you guys next week." Well, hopefully we see you soon too, Anthony. Again, just to reiterate what I said at the beginning of the stream, this week and last week, I'm going to be out of town for the next couple weeks. That's why we're doing the stream on a Saturday. You guys picked last stream that Saturday was better than Sunday, so that's why we're doing it today. We will not have a stream on Tuesday like usual this week. Coming for the next 2 weeks, I will not be there. It'll be up to Sanak whether he streams or not. If he can get it in, great. We will have streams. Keep an eye out on the community section. If not, then we might have these couple weeks off. But we will be back in 2 weeks for you guys to stream again. So keep an eye out on the community feed or it's called posts now. Keep an eye out on posts or the live tab, and you'll be able to see when we are going live. So thank you again, Anthony. Hopefully you can join us next time. Anthony also says, I read the Legacy of Vader comic issue #1, and it was really good. 4.9 out of 5. Wonder what it is, that point one that kept you from giving it a perfect score. I have not gotten to read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to reading it. It actually might be one of the few series that I do pick up in singles because it is something I'm very much so looking forward to. But I'm glad you really enjoyed it.
I'm very excited for it too. The fact that it's an ongoing and not like a mini series like we got with the Rise of Kylo Ren. I think there's potential for it to also be fleshing out some of those extraneous details or plot lines that are kind of rushed through, kind of glanced over. I'd love to see some scenes of reflection from Kylo, especially now that he's in charge. I know there was like a promo release a couple pages like a week ago of like where you see him like get all the troops together and like declare himself fully as like I am now the commander, the supreme commander of the First Order, and then he like uses the force and from a crate lifts up the two halves of Snoke, which I mean already Charles Soule gets the weight, the size of fantasy that the sequel trilogy truly does love to kind of sit in compared to even the other two trilogies. But sometimes it is about the grandeur and it doesn't have to be grandeur in the same way as like a space battle has to be. So I'd love to see what Kylo's story looks like. I'm looking forward to reading it soon. I'm a little behind since Battle of Jakku ended, but I'll be catching up pretty soon here too. I know we've told Patreons and YouTube members who have signed up for those tiers that we're gonna have reviews out. They're getting going. It'll happen soon. I promise. We're just we're just handling a lot of different things. You know, Liam's vacation. I think Kylie Stewart also asked, like, "Oh, why does your room look different?" Well, I'm currently in the process of moving out, so a couple of things are all kind of happening very quickly here. So we'll settle in, but Legacy of Vader will get some sort of reaction from both of us pretty soon here.
Kevin Davis says, "Do you think Star Wars Celebration in Japan is going to be live streamed on Disney Plus?" It's an interesting idea. I'm not sure if they've ever streamed a Celebration on Disney Plus or not, but it will, I'm sure, be streamed to YouTube. On Star Wars
Yeah.
YouTube channel, they almost always have some type of big stage with guests and interviews constantly going throughout the day, as well as kind of recaps of big news and stuff. So I'm sure StarWars.com, Star Wars YouTube channel, they'll have something going if it's not on Disney Plus, which is, even better for everybody because it's free. So you get the content there. But as for us in Star Wars Celebration, we're not going to Celebration, but we will be streaming slash reacting to everything we can from Celebration. Hopefully, there's a lot of big news to talk about, and we're looking forward to hearing what all the fuss is about. I know it is pretty exciting because we don't usually talk about when there's like a story about, oh, this person's going to Celebration, because it's not, it doesn't really matter to most people, only the people who are going to Celebration. But Oscar Isaac's now going to Celebration, which I think is a big one, not only just because he's currently a really busy, popular actor, but it's another era worth of characters to go to Star Wars Celebration. You've got a lot of the people who always go to Celebration going, but you also have a lot of people from the sequel trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the original trilogy. There's crossing of every Star Wars trilogy there. I think that's pretty exciting. It might be for specifically like the Force Awakens 10th anniversary, which is going to be a big thing this year as well. We're going to get 10th anniversary of Force Awakens, which I cannot believe it's been 10 years, and also the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith. So those
Yeah.
two anniversaries, I'm sure, will be fairly big for Celebration. I keep thinking more about Revenge of the Sith, not just because it's my favorite Star Wars movie, and I'm very excited for whatever the poster is going to be, and whenever they announce a marathon for that one, I'm really looking forward to that. But because that's a May release, so I feel like that one's you would celebrate first, and then Force Awakens might get its re-release in December or so, because that's when that movie came out. But yeah, it could just be to celebrate that, or it could be because they're really going to go all in with news and make this a huge celebration, which I wouldn't be shocked because Celebration Europe 2016 with Rogue One was not huge, and it kind of put the stigma on like, oh yeah, when it's not in the United States, it's not going to be that big, because 17 was huge and 15 was huge when it was here in the United States. But then 2023 was a pretty big celebration. They announced a lot of things. They dropped the first Ahsoka trailer with the first shot of Thrawn. So that was a pretty big celebration. So I'm hoping that this year's celebration is equally as exciting, even though it is overseas.
Yeah, it's a tough question because I don't know if Disney Plus is the right platform, like Liam said, probably YouTube. We've always kind of had a live stream ongoing during Celebration, but that's mostly been like the Celebration live stage. And don't get me wrong, that's been really great. That's especially a good staging ground for like a lot of other actors and actresses before they actually have their show debut. I don't think I think the Skeleton Crew kids had a little bit on Celebration Live, but it wasn't really super big or anything because it was still fairly early on. But yeah, I don't know. It's we'll get that at least. News wise, we'll get maybe some promos and stuff. The big trailer stuff, they've historically just never they put that online unless they really want to leave like some sort of impact. So yeah, I would I don't know. I would hope that they kind of break the stigma a little bit, and especially since they have the anniversaries going on, that they at least show some interesting trailers or some stuff that could be connected to the sequel trilogy, some stuff that could be connected to the Revenge of the Sith 20th, right? And if there's some new shows that, like, we get some very early trailer of, and that's the only thing that's not shown, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
If they end up going with, like, an anime and, like, an official Star Wars anime, and it's exclusively only for the Japanese audience, I don't think most of the rest of the world would be happy. So, I think live action, you can kinda get away with that a little bit because 'cause you're like, "Oh, he's still in the process, it's not really fully touched up and all that." But if you show, like, an anime with a full trailer and it's not shown anywhere online, people would be pretty upset. So, it's all to be determined. I really do hope they get past outside celebrations being not so big, because this would be a great way with all the anniversaries to be like, let's make this a standard. Let's try it out. Maybe the only difference is that there's a date less of the celebration when it's outside of the states, but you still get all great time, and it's worthwhile to go on these trips if you know that they're going to be a little bit shorter. You don't have to like spend an extra day in the hotel or fly out on a day that might be a little bit more expensive or something if you're not from Japan or not from Europe. So yeah, I hope for the best. That's the only way you can do it, Kevin.
I think we'll get 3 trailers for sure released to the public. Like, I think we're gonna get a Visions trailer, I think we're gonna get an Andor trailer, and I think we will for sure get some type of teaser for Mandalorian and Grogu. It'll be about a year out, 13 months out, and they've already released kind of a in production teaser
Yeah,
at one of the Comic Cons or D23 or something last year. And I think this year they're going to do it similar to Force Awakens, especially since Star Wars has been dormant in the movie theaters for 7 years when Mandalorian comes out. They're going to release something to hype people up for that movie and start getting the talk going. So I think
yeah,
they'll release a small teaser for that. They'll probably show some bigger stuff to people who are there that won't come out unless it's leaked, but won't be publicly released. But I think we'll get a small teaser for that. And then, yeah, if they have an announcement for something, usually that doesn't come out if they show any footage for it. But I think with the idea that Ahsoka hasn't started shooting yet, they're not going to really show anything of that. um, excuse me, Skeleton Crew season 2 got announced. They're not going to show anything of that because they haven't started shooting yet. So unless they have some secret projects that they've already shot, or that whatever the secret animated project is, or like you mentioned, an anime, I don't think there's really anything else to show. So I would imagine the majority of the like exclusive convention only stuff are going to be clips from Mandalorian and Grogu, or maybe an extended trailer. A lot of times they do like
yeah,
a 2 minute trailer they release online, and then the one you get to see at the celebration is 2.5, 3 minutes long. So I would imagine something like that. But I think they are going to focus on animation because that's, from all the rumors, that's the only possible thing that could really come out this year in the second half of the year is a new animated show, whether it's anime or 3D animation that Lucasfilm is working on. We're going to get something in that realm, but I would imagine we at least get 3 trailers. I think 2 trailers for sure because we're going to get an
oh, yeah.
Andor something and we're going to get Visions. But I would imagine 3. Next up, we have Travis, who says, "How's it going, guys? How's it going, Travis? Hope you're enjoying your weekend and you are enjoying the show." Then we have Critical Thinker says, "What are your thoughts on Jim Starlin's Batman run? I think it's pretty underrated, especially the cult arc, and had some great development for Jason Todd. It's also a nice look into the political zeitgeist of the time, even if it does date the book a little bit." Thank you so much for that that comment. Are you specifically talking about the cult or the entire run? Because he also did the Death in the Family, which killed Jason Todd. So there's a lot of really good stuff that Starlin did. I think it is an underrated run, also because it kind of came. It's one of the more notable ones that came after the Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams run, which is so iconic. The one that created Ra's al Ghul and all those characters. So that's such a great run. Really redefined Batman. And then you have Starlin, and then the reboot basically with year one. So there's it is a forgotten one, but I feel like it's not that forgotten because of the fact that he wrote A Death in the Family, which is
Yeah.
obviously one of the most seminal Batman
Yeah.
stories. And it's not quite as amazing as you would think. There's some strange stuff in the Death in the Family, but as for the cult, it is a really good book. It's a nice little prelude to a lot of the things they do in Dark Knight Returns as well with Frank Miller when he does that. But it's a pretty interesting story. I would say I don't know what like my official Batman rankings would be, but it would be in the upper half of the Batman stories I've read. It is a really strong story.
Nothing I can add. I haven't really read Batman comics like that. I do intend to become a little bit more of a traditional comic book reader over time. Just right now, I am stuck with Star Wars, and I read all of Invincible just because I felt like it one day. But uh, yeah, stuff like that. But I will get into more Marvel and DC this year, especially because Superman's coming out, and especially because Fantastic Four is coming out, and Liam's always talking about like the Hickman run for Fantastic
Man,
Four and all
oh,
that.
it's
And
so good.
I still remember like their appearance when my old newspaper used to deliver for some sort of anniversary of Spider-Man. Like they started giving out like the first 20-ish issues. So I still remember some of that 60s Spider-Man, 60s Fantastic Four. So I'm very curious to see the evolution chart, all the iconic stories, and some of the ones that are less iconic but still end up shaping these very iconic characters at least.
Critical Thinker also says favorite thing about new canon you prefer over the EU and vice versa. That's a tough one for new canon over the EU. One of the things I'll go right off the bat with EU over canon that I immediately prefer if we're talking about books, especially, but just any media, is it attempted to tell new stories and continue to push the lore. They
Yeah.
always push the lore. One of the reasons they were able to do that is because with the canon tiers that they had back then, if George Lucas just wanted to erase something they wrote, he just did it. There's no fuss about it. He just overwrote it, wrote it, and then everybody else had to deal with it. So they were able to write pretty much anything they wanted, within means of it being a Star Wars story. Um, and George didn't really have any involvement with those stories. There was not like an overarching canon group like we have now trying to make everything fit, which has led to now we have much safer stories that don't necessarily try to do things that are as important. And even when they do start to look like they're going to tell something that's really, really exciting and important, oftentimes they pull back in favor of something that's more minute in terms of canon significance. So that is immediately something I prefer over the EU. The focus on the Skywalkers as well, the fact that it's so much more well defined, but also canon has only existed for 10 going on 11 years now, and the EU existed for over 30 when it was canceled. So it's hard to compare the two continuities in terms of like the amount of content, the amount of great content. The EU certainly wins in the fact that when you read the books, it actually feels important, not like a filler story. As for canon, one of the things I think it's done better, again, I assume when we're talking about canon versus EU, we're specifically talking about books, comics, video games, like that side of the extended lore, not TV shows. Because obviously, if you include TV shows, that's something canon's done better because you have all 7 seasons of the Clone Wars and you have every live action show and the Bad Batch and Rebels. Versus EU was only the droids and Ewok shows, and then the original Clone Wars and the first 6 seasons of Clone Wars. Which, as much as I love the original Clone Wars, the amount of good to great stuff we've gotten since 2014 on TV is significant enough to where I would give that edge to canon there, even if pretty much nothing besides maybe Rebels has come close to being like a favorite show, or besides Andor and Rebels, a favorite show of mine over that original Clone Wars. But if we're talking specifically about books and comics, I think comics has done a great job of really giving us important character moments for a lot of big characters: Luke, Leia, Han. I've liked how we've basically redone what we did in the 70s and 80s with Marvel Star Wars comics then, now, and retold the gaps between the original trilogy in comic form, but this time being that Star Wars is a lot more established than it was back then as a style and as a form. The stories have been a little bit more interesting, a little bit more compelling, and less pulpy or less comic booky. Even though those are fun pieces of history, I think this is a little bit better for the overall Star Wars lore. The other thing that canon does really well, and I just did a top 10 Legends books of all time if you want to go check it out on my other channel. But it's when I was really looking at the list, because was working on my top 10 canon books as well. EU really doesn't have like any character specific stories. There are a handful, like Kenobi is one, but even those types of stories, they really try to push the plot forward. They're a little less
Mhm.
focused, hyper focused on character. And even though I'm tired of the character specific stories, we have gotten a lot of really interesting deep dives on a lot of characters in canon that the EU never really did. The EU sprinkled it out across larger narrative, which is great as well, and it is what I prefer. But you wouldn't have something like the two Thrawn trilogies we have in canon as much in the EU. You wouldn't have something like Brotherhood. You wouldn't have something like Bloodline in the EU. These specific Leia or Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon books, Master and Apprentice, uh, though in the EU had a lot more. Here's a plot point, we have to resolve it, but also the characters are going to learn a few things on the way. So that's something I would give to canon. Still prefer the style that EU went for, but that's a point I would give to canon over the EU.
Yeah, to start off, almost inverted here, kind of going with how your question was first posited here, critical thinker. I think the biggest thing that canon has done better than EU has been Vader. I think no matter what, even if you drop Rogue One, even if you drop his appearance that we've gotten in Rebels, if you drop anything, visual animation, it's like a visual medium of on your screen, you're watching it on Disney Plus, it's still great stuff there. We've got all his appearances in Fallen Order and Survivor that are really solid for him. His book appearances have been really good. The comics, I think, even if you don't love the 2020 run, I think they've been a lot sharper and a lot stronger about what they're trying to say about his character as a whole than some of the fun ones that we got, like Darth Vader and Ghost Prison. That's all cool and all, but it's not even really about him. He just happens to be a character. And one thing that EU, especially after like 2005, really started doing is that any character has some sort of MacGuffin or some sort of way of coming up against Vader and like keeping him on his back foot until he, inevitably wins. But I really dislike that because you made Vader just seem like, I mean, ironically, his version that he has in Episode 4, the original Star Wars, where he's just villain of the day. He's got a cool outfit, but that's really about it. Like he's virtually indistinguishable from characters that we see in like a Dark Empire comic, right? And that's never how Vader should be, especially after Empire Strikes Back. So really happy with what we've gotten. Obviously, now that we've seen it in live action too, he's been great there. I know it doesn't really, it's not really fair to compare that to the EU, but still, it's he's been handled perfectly. You could say like one of the weakest things for him is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I still thought there's a lot there that was really good because you'd still see him snap somebody's neck and do all these crazy things that you're like, oh, he's a fallen Jedi who's a fascist, who's a monster, he's everything, right? Like, and you don't get that vibe. And I think that also became a thing that was a little bit problematic with a lot of what we're getting out of later EU, or well, not even necessarily late EU, but like that transition from Bantam to New Jedi Order and then New Jedi Order onwards. There's a lot of imperial apologia, right? And weirdest thing was that you'd apologize for some stuff about like Pelion or Thrawn and Palpatine, but then you're like, oh, but Vader can just screw him. Like we'll just make him look even weaker than he always does, which I never understood. If you're gonna do anything to apologize for, be like, well, this is a guy with incredible power who had incredibly terrible things happen to him. Some of it is his own doing for sure, but let's at least make him a character that when you reference him in Ben Skywalker's time, you should still feel that gravitas because you're still seeing stories come out every couple years that you're like, man, that's just another thing. Remember when you like rip someone's like spine out of their back or something like that? Like, no, I don't think that Vader of late EU is anywhere near what we're getting in canon. He has been consistently great. He's been consistently devastating. He's been consistently the Vader that everyone thinks about when they see him. So that's the one thing I'd really nail down, that canon has done Vader right, and we're in a position now that there can be so many new stories about Vader, and I would still be excited, right? Maybe I don't want a super like long ongoing of like 60, 70 issues, but I don't like that idea of, hey, Vader just can be a guy. That's never the point of Star Wars, especially at this day and age. EU, I agree. Like Liam said, stories had more weight for sure. Uh, but I think one thing that kind of comes with canon being very steady about the type of stories that it's telling is that they sometimes don't really go as dark as they want to be. I think Dark Disciple is a good example of like when they took that original scripts and then they made it a little bit darker, a little bit more sensual. And I thought that really worked for that story and elevated it in the confines of its medium, right? I don't think that really happens for the most part. I think there's some great exceptions, right? Like Alphabet Squadron and the Battlefront books. Basically, anything by Alexander Freed, you're like, okay, like now we're really pushing to see what in this text-based form that we can do. Outside of that, no. I mean, it's great character focuses, but we're not getting these larger stories with multiple characters where you get to see something devastating happen. You get to see some crazy things happening in their mind. I don't know. I don't feel like canon has really done that unless they're focused on a main central character's novel, like a Bloodline or Princess Leia's young adult version, right? It doesn't really feel like that's something that canon is really matched up to the EU where you can have a little bit more diversity and variety of like what this medium can be. Now, obviously, for the EU, that is a little bit more pulpier. You see a big difference between the Bantam level of storytelling and New Jedi Order, but you could still see some crazy, interesting shifts up and down. I don't think I really see that from canon as much. That's why when I'm seeing stuff like Path of the Lightsaber and all that, now it does feel like there's a little bit more of a willingness to adapt like the best parts, the flexibility of each medium. Hopefully, like a Path of the Lightsaber is more of a manga than what we get with Edge of Balance, which don't get me wrong, it's great, but it really is just a Japanese comic that's very stoic, right? So I'd like to see the same thing happen with books where we have these larger stories and it happens, to be that each book can be very different vibes and different feelings and different genres that they're pulling from. The closest besides those character novels that we get is the High Republic, but I feel like it's always kind of tiered out to like, okay, we know to expect this from the adult novels at this point. We know to expect this from the young adult. We know to expect this from the junior reader. So when something like a temptation of the force happens, you're like, great, there's some romance here. This is different. This is pretty unique. But it's also coming at a point where you've already built up so much expectation and now you're expecting plot to start really kicking in for phase three. And you're like, is this really the time to make this work? Is this maybe something that should have been more of like a young adult novel or a comic series or something? But they're so consistently sure about what they're doing with each book and the tone that they kind of miss out like just how much they can stretch out. And that's what I hope that they get to do a little bit more so that we don't have to be sequestered into like here's a whole initiative and here's a character one-off novel. If we start getting more trilogies and stuff like Alexander Freed does, then I think the EU superiority kind of starts fading a little bit.
Skywalker's Academy says Andor trailer during halftime tomorrow. Might not be during halftime, but it could be at some point throughout the rest of the show or
Mhm.
the rest of the game. I'm kind of hoping there's one. We got our first solo Star Wars story trailer during Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That was the only difference between this is Andor and that is I haven't heard any rumors about Andor having a trailer. Uh, when Solo was coming out, it was all hyped up everywhere. It was like, yeah, it's coming. Here it is. Stay tuned for the Super Bowl. There's going to be a trailer. So they haven't teased it at all. With how expensive it is to put something out on the Super Bowl, I would imagine they would tease it a little bit to get people hyped, or at least to get people to check it out during the game. But never know. We'll be ready to react to it if there is one tomorrow, because I'm hoping that we do. If we don't get one tomorrow, then I really hope it's not during the 2 weeks I'm gone. But I don't see us really getting one before maybe Celebration, because or at least
Yeah.
beginning of April, because I think that would make sense because Disney Plus marketing right now is going to be very focused on Daredevil. And so if they're not trying to, even though, Star Wars, Marvel really shouldn't have, it's similar audience, but it shouldn't have anything to do with each other's marketing. I really wish they marketed these shows a little bit earlier. And I
Yeah.
think, they did a little bit with the Acolyte, and the Acolyte didn't work out. So maybe that was them saying, and we're going to pull back on marketing, because Skeleton Crew was like not marketed at all
At all.
until
Yeah.
the last 3 weeks before the show came out. So we'll see which approach they take. I can't remember what they did with Andor. I feel like the first trailer for Andor was like a month before the show came out as well. So maybe 5-6 weeks at most. So we'll see. We'll see what they do. I feel like it's going to be a Celebration drop, but if it's not Celebration, because Celebration is only like a week before, 2 weeks before. If it's not Celebration, it'll probably be right as Daredevil ends, like kind of right at, like because that's what they did with Skeleton Crew because they had the Skeleton Crew trailer right, and it was like 2 days after Agatha ended last time, and so in I think beginning of November. So
Yeah.
if they do that same thing when Daredevil ends, Daredevil's supposed to end. Actually, no, Daredevil's going through April though, so Daredevil
I think
starts
there's,
in
like, a
March.
couple overlap a little bit, right? Like, maybe a week or
Yeah,
2?
I don't know, maybe right as Daredevil starts then, if Daredevil starts and they're like, "Okay, well, now our marketing is fully, ramped up for that, maybe we'll do Andor." That'll be interesting, but hopefully we get something tomorrow, but if I had to bet
Yeah.
on Disney putting out a trailer tomorrow, it's going to be Captain America and it's gonna be Daredevil. I think it's those 2 are locks. Andor, not convinced.
Yeah, I have a lot of the same opinion there. I do hope we get at least maybe, like, the celebration or D23, like, where it's like a montage of different things happening, at least to get people like, "Hey, remember, like, this is coming. This is the final season." As long as it's like a tweaked version of that, I would be pretty happy, but yeah, it kinda does depend on if they really have anything on their slate ready and open for that. Like, if it happens, it feels like that's like a 3rd quarter ad or something. It's definitely not like anything around halftime. It's not definitely something in the prime of, like, the first 2, right? It's something a little bit more later, and it probably is just a quick, like, Disney Plus footage, and this is just one of, the many things that they wanna show off for the platform as opposed to it's kind of its own individual thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Skywalker's Academy says though that the shortest time we've had before a season for a trailer drop was 77 days, and we're now 73 days from Andor. And at first I was like, no, that can't be right. But actually, you are right
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we did have that teaser for Skeleton Crew during D23, even though we didn't get our next trailer for like over 2 months after that, almost 3 months for Skeleton Crew. But that was a really small teaser. So yeah, I mean, maybe we'll get like a minute long teaser for the first Andor. I'm hoping so because it doesn't really make sense for any other time. Like, there's no big events coming up where you would advertise it, specifically Star Wars related events or anything like that. So this is your time. We'll see. Maybe they're just relying on goodwill from Andor season one to be like, we don't need to market this as much. Who knows? Who knows what they'll do? But they have so many projects coming up with Marvel. I feel like that's what they're going to focus on. But hopefully we're wrong. Skywalker's Academy says you like Liam. You like Revenge of the Sith better than the Rise of Skywalker? Yes, a lot better. like
Yeah.
like significantly more. Rise of Skywalker is my least favorite of the Skywalker saga. Revenge of the Sith is my favorite. So
To be fair, I think he's saying that a little sarcastically because he's kinda got the, like, sideways crying face.
yeah,
Like,
no, I
"Oh,
figured.
really?" Like, come on. Nobody even if you love The Rise of Skywalker, because there definitely are people I've seen who've loved the, like, sequels more than the originals and the prequel trilogy, which, totally fair, totally valid. I do find that even those fans very much struggle to put, like, any of the sequels above The Rise of Skywalker. So, if you do, great. I'd love to hear your opinion a little bit more on that. But I wouldn't say The Rise of Skywalker would be the first film to come in mind from the sequels that is as exciting or as fun as Revenge of the Sith for people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be that generation who grew up with Rise of Skywalker, like we grew up with Revenge of the Sith, who are gonna love it, but not us. Or not me. I'll speak for myself. Father Karras says, listening to Tuesday show, recalled that J.J. Abrams doing a 60 minutes interview with his wife after the successful release of The Force Awakens and talking about needing to do an original project for a change as an important next step for his career, and hence why he didn't want to continue with the trilogy. Still waiting. Not really, though. Well, thanks for that little tidbit. I can't remember that interview.
Yeah.
But yeah, he has not directed a single thing since The Rise of Skywalker. He has shifted his career definitely to be a little bit more George Lucas-esque in terms of like started out as director and now pretty much full-time producer. So he's definitely more in the producing role, but he really has been kind of MIA in general since The Rise of Skywalker. Like, I can't really recall too many projects he's even produced for anything. So
Yeah.
Um, that is weird because George didn't disappear when Star Wars was over. You know, even though he moved into more of a producing role, he was on Indiana Jones immediately. A year after Star Wars ended, he was on Indiana Jones Temple of Doom. Then he had Last Crusade. They had the Young Indiana Jones show. He had Howard the Duck. There's all these things he was producing in the meantime between the Star Wars trilogies. So yeah, it's kind of interesting what happened to JJ.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of got into that whole thing where it seems like these days directors and actors are all like building out their own studio and then pitching projects that they could be involved in via their studio. And it's not a terrible idea, but I know he was developing like the black, like I don't know what Earth it's from, but like there's that Black Superman story that he was trying to develop for a bit there,
Hmm.
um, and that never really panned out. There's some TV show or something that he spent like 4 or 5 years doing. He's done a lot of shows and movies that he's been developing. I feel like the only thing that he like released was like that one surprise Cloverfield film that he dropped on Netflix that I think
Yeah,
had like a Super Bowl trailer or something, and then nothing's really happened for him. It seems like a lot of people have, like, also pulled money from him because it's like, "It's not gonna happen here, it's not gonna work out here." Warner Brothers put a lot of faith and trust into him, and it doesn't seem like any of it panned out. I think maybe he put out 1 movie or 1 show or something. So, yeah, but, I mean, the second half of what you're saying, like, not really just not really waiting for him. Well, I don't know, like, I'm of the same agreement, but I still am a fan of, like, films like Super 8. I feel like he got a good, like, Spielberg imitation out there. I feel like he did a pretty good job with The Force Awakens, and, like, a good enough job considering the time crunch and everything of The Rise of Skywalker, but we know John Boyega talked highly about him. He was, like, so happy about The Rise of Skywalker. Clearly looks like a lot of his stuff got cut down in the edit after JJ kinda came back. But even now afterwards, he's been saying well, he hasn't said anything recently at least, but he's been saying like, "Oh, the only way I get back to Star Wars is with JJ." So, is this mean like he's gonna be a producer and that's enough for him? Or is it like, "Oh, he has to be the director for what it comes next for for Finn as a character?"
yeah.
I don't know, but it seems like he's gonna have to have some sort of role if that is like the requirement for John Boyega to come back. Um, but personally, I'm pretty happy getting away from the whole mystery box thing. I'm just not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of like his current output. Doesn't really seem like much has happened here. So if he comes, it should just be like as like a good moral support, a good influence, a good way of connecting and making sure the sets are running smoothly. Which is a key point of why he was one of the best producers, especially in the early 2000s and all that. A little bit more hit or miss as a director, and definitely it seems like with his own mini production studio is a little bit even more of a miss there. So use him with his best skills if that's what we need to get Boyega back, but don't have him work as the lead of a Star Wars project. I don't think he would have even if we gave him the sequel trilogy, I don't think he would have ended it right either. I think he would have just let it kind of fizzle out because that's unfortunately a thing that he does when he has to do sequels to like a big success that he has.
Yeah, he hasn't directed anything according to IMDb since The Rise of Skywalker. He has 3 things scheduled to direct. One is in or 2 are in pre-production. There's one called Demimonde. It's a TV show. He's supposed to direct an episode of that. He's supposed to direct an episode of Duster, which is in production. It's a show, I guess. And then he's in pre-production on an untitled J.J. Abrams project. So there you go. Those are his directing credits since The Rise of Skywalker. But yeah, as for producer, I mean, he has a million things in the pipeline as a producer. Most of them say in development. But I didn't realize he was an executive producer on Batman: The Caped Crusader on Amazon this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything else he did is of little note, or at least I've never heard of, other than Lovecraft County. He was producer on that. So yeah, very few things. He did a Beyond UFOs and the Unknown show miniseries. But yeah, he's in pre-production on a lot of things. One thing I still forget is coming out. I can't believe it's coming out. Is they're making Constantine 2 and he's a producer on that. I'm not sure when that's coming out, probably 26. But God, Constantine 2. It's such a cult following. And we're finally getting a sequel for it like 20 something
That's
years
yeah,
later
that's
when
so
Keanu Reeves was already a terrible pick to play John Constantine. But his his movies still pretty fun. and he does a good job for what he's doing, but he's not playing John Constantine.
Yeah.
There, J.J. Abrams also has a Hot Wheels movie in development. If you didn't know that, a Hot Wheels movie, a Portal movie, a Half Life movie, a Star Trek prequel movie. Got a lot of things in development. We'll see what
A lot of
actually comes out. But
franchise
yes,
stuff
funny you
there,
mentioned.
JJ, not really original.
Yeah, yeah, no original. He's got a million things in there, so who knows? He might have some original. But yeah, that's an interesting thing you bring up that we haven't seen anything from him since The Rise of Skywalker. And he was like, he's not wasn't a small enough name to where you would think like a failure like The Rise of Skywalker would just ruin him, right? Like maybe it ruined him. Maybe it made him not want to do as much. But you would think like it wouldn't mess up his career or anything because he had a really prominent studio. Bad Robot you saw everywhere. They produce so many things. So just haven't seen Bad Robot anywhere. It's interesting. All right. Well, Critical Thinker says The Cult is definitely among my favorite Batman books. A Death in the Family is kind of weird at times, but I do really like the scene where Bruce considers killing Joker. Yeah, it does have great scenes. It's just like, when you see a lot of the you see a lot of the adaptations of A Death in the Family nowadays, they're all, more gritty, a little darker, and A Death in the Family is much more pulpy until the actual death of Jason. So it's kind of a completely different vibe, but it is still a really good story. When it has the emotional beats, they really hit. And The Cult is really good. I would agree. Don't know where it ranks on my Batman list, but it probably in my like top 25 at least. And then Critical Thinker also says 10 Nights of the Beast is quite good, aside maybe from Batman killing KG Beast at the end. Yeah, it is a good story. Like that would be one I would definitely say is underrated. Like The Cult, I feel like is talked about a lot, even if it is not always listed in like the top 10 Batman stories. It's still ranked pretty highly. KG Beast, 10 Nights of the Beast is one that I would definitely say is underrated. Father Karras. Oh, wait, no, I already answered that one. Critical Thinker says, same. It's hard to think of too many things better or that the new canon has done better than the EU. Like the Gris kind of just being dropped and ignored by everyone besides Zahn. Yeah, that makes me mad too. Like I'm just waiting for Zahn to finally get to be able to write his next series. I know he has a lot of stuff coming out, so I don't know if it's just him taking a break from Star Wars, but I feel like if they said, "Hey, we want you to write the next Thrawn stuff," he'd come back instantly. So hopefully we get more Timothy Zahn Thrawn here soon because it does leave you kind of on a cliffhanger at the end of Ascendancy.
Yeah, I know Critical Thinker was saying, like, at I think Dragon Con or something, he mentioned, like, he wants to bring Mara back, but he's been told, "No, that's not really an option right now." Who knows? Maybe there's some I mean, well, he's a guy who's got a lot of history with, like, other creatives where he's kind of gotten his way, like, versus Feige, like, that whole rivalry really shaped a lot of the early EU. So I wonder now that, like, with how canon is very focused on, like, specific types of stories being told and specific characters being able to be continued, if maybe he's at a standoff on that, because maybe he thinks now is a great time for him to bring Mara into the story. Maybe he has an idea for it, but they don't wanna, like, bring in Mara into a Mandoverse. Maybe they wanna have it so that she has her own era or something, like, we don't know the details there. I don't think it's never say never for Mara. I think she can come back, into canon in some form, shape, and there's still enough time with what we have leading up to, like, Shadow of the Sith for her to have kinda told her entire story. Um, but yeah, it is, it is a bit of a weird thing that we haven't heard any news about him doing Star Wars novels specifically. Maybe he's consulting a lot with, everything going on there with Filoni and Favreau for Mandalorian, Grogu, and then Ahsoka, and just however Thrawn's gonna be handled. Like, maybe he's hoping and pushing for Filoni to mention the Grisk or something about, like, maybe at, like, Thrawn's final moments that segues him into the books that he wants to do, and then instead of having Thrawn, it's Arlani, it's Eli Vanto, and all those kinda taking up, and we kinda get a quasi sort of Thrawn duology where he's not there, but his sphere of influence and everything that he's done before and after his return to the galaxy has, like, more to say and more of an impact on some interesting and new Chiss stories, and maybe even Zahn ventures out past Thrawn and does some stuff where he can do, like, an entirely new trilogy that doesn't feature any of his established characters, and then segue that for other people to kind of build out and kinda get his wishes that way, so
Mhm.
It's all to be determined. He is a bit of an older guy too, so can't really be pushing him more than the 6 books that he's already done for canon. So all to be determined. But I hope he at least gets one more novel out that features the characters that he wants to focus on.
I agree. It would be really disappointing if he never wrapped up a lot of the loose ends that he's set up, because he's set up a lot of epic storytelling. I mean, going back into the points we both just talked about things we prefer for the EU over canon, and then following it up with critical thinkers' thoughts and saying, yeah, there was a bit of a weird. The Empire would have been cool if it wasn't for Palpatine stuff and Survivor's Quest. Didn't like how Soon Fell was just sort of written like a good guy despite his Imperial past, which kind of makes it weird how comfortable the main heroes are with his son Jagged, despite having some Imperial connections himself. The new canon is lacking bigger swings or darker stories like the EU had. Be experimental and go for it, is what I want them to do. The EU got pretty goofy in the Bantam era, but I think the shift to more serious and interconnected storytelling of the Del Rey era was great, and in my opinion, the peak of Star Wars novels, despite its flaws. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on the taking big swings. That's the main thing I just want from canon. I think High Republic has been a pretty good start. Unfortunately, with the High Republic, the one negative is the fact that whenever you go back in time, whenever you do prequel stories, ultimately we know where the outcome is. Fortunately, we don't know what's going to happen to these characters, so that's like a positive, because any of them could die and we won't know
Yeah.
it. But the negative is you kind of overall know where the galaxy is going. So it's not going to have the main like lore impact. But again, one thing that canon's done well, character, and you can have big character impact that way. So I just want them to take bigger swings too. I think they just need to decide what they want to do and just commit. I know they're afraid to commit because they want to save Luke and Leia and Han and all those characters for a possible show one day, or whether they recast, whether they have the technology to do deep fakes, whether no matter what it is, they want to save them. And they've made that very clear by the fact that they keep doing deep fakes. But at some point you got to rip the band-aid off and just say, are we going to do it or are we not? Because one of the reasons EU was so beloved is because they often took our big characters and did big things with them. And canon just refuses to do that. And it makes me not get that excited when you have like a Han Solo book coming out, because it's just not going to be that important. It's not going to be that interesting. So yeah, hopefully they change that. But and then as for the Darth Vader point too, I definitely agree that Vader has been more of a character in canon. Like, I think one of the things, especially if you want to compare Vader comics in canon to Vader comics in later Legends, when you had those miniseries like Ghost Prison and Lost Command and all that stuff, was that in those books Vader was a little less of a character. He was more a part of the story, but he's not. You don't get behind the mask as much. In canon, they've found a really good job. They found a really good formula for making Vader a lead character while also keeping the spirit of the scary, intimidating villain version of Darth Vader, rather than converting him into an anti-hero, but also getting you closer to him. So where Legends oftentimes was much more like, okay, he's scary, he's intimidating, he's the villain, but he's further away. We're not in his head. He's being
Yeah.
observed by this stormtrooper or this Imperial cadet or this person or that person. Canon's found a strong formula for making him an actual character.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to all those points, I agree. I think the Del Rey era around New Jedi Order is probably where storytelling kind of peaked for me. We haven't really reached that level yet, but I think we have potential for that in canon. That late Del Rey, it gets complicated because there's so many initiatives at that point, right? That's so much more of Lucas's influence being directly connected, right? If we were talking about like how there's like, oh, there's Clone Wars '03 and how that was kind of meant to be connected to '08, and a lot of early '08 kind of basically assumes that it's all leading into that. And that's all wonderful and all, but there's plenty of people who are still upset by '05's Clone Wars initiative and everything that kind of went there with the multimedia of that, and then running up against the '08, right? That was one of the big things that was going to happen by Leland Chi. He's like, I'm going to make a unified, explainable version of all these events and all these different characterizations. It's not gonna ever happen, obviously, but yeah, I think once we started reaching these initiatives that the prequels had a little more influence on, and once we got past New Jedi Order and they wanted to connect to the active storytelling that was being made, that was being viewed by more and more people, the EU lost its way. So stuff like Coruscant Nights and all that is great because you don't really have any other influences outside of like comics and other extended material. But a lot of the books I feel like lost their way as their series because okay, we have to reference some development in the prequels now that recontextualizes everything about these characters, and then they have to act like it's always been that way. And I can't blame them there, but then do I really think a Fate of the Jedi should handle the Blade of Mortis storyline? Like, no. I don't think Abeloth really matches up anyways, with how the father, the son, and daughter as the mortal, as the Mortis Celestials, right? So yeah, I can't say I love that. As far as the Imperial Apologia, yeah, Survivor's Quest is a great example. It's very weird why it's like that, but I suppose some of that also comes from like Timothy Zahn when he does this like little Mara Jade duology there of books too, where it's like you're kind of getting into like how they have to do what's right by the Empire, all these stormtroopers who are kind of gone rogue and all that. But yeah, again, I'm not saying it's not a bad idea to have brought in these prequel ideas. I just think that like once it becomes like the centerpiece of such late stage EU, decades past what we're seeing in even New Jedi Order, it starts being like, okay, now you're just kind of forcing it. Like I think it was a little bit better, but once we reach Fate of the Jedi, even though people enjoy those books for the most part, I think everyone's like, "Well, what does this Mortis stuff have anything to do with what we saw in Clone Wars?" It doesn't really feel like the same sort of stuff. So that's just me. I think a lot of the Imperial Apologia, though, that you mentioned, past Survivor's Quest, and why like Jagged is just so casually in line with that Solo family that has Han, who's probably like the most anti-Imperial guy out there as a Corellian, allows his daughter, and his daughter is willingly getting married to Jagged and becoming, at some point, the queen consort of that empire. It's a weird situation, and then even in like legacy comics, they're like, "Oh, we've all envisioned seeing some Skywalker sitting on some throne, like a feudal Jedi system of sorts." So it's like, okay, that's all really weird. I don't know if the Skywalkers themselves would want that. Maybe an Anakin when he's gotten mad, but do they always think that? I don't know. It's weird, right? You go for that Imperial angle and a literal empire that's under the fells, and then you're saying, oh, but there's still like a Jedi kingdom to be. So it felt really weird what they're going with there. So some of that might have also been stemming from Empire of the Hand because it's Thrawn, it's different, but I don't know, it still feels like even if you're trying to retcon Thrawn with the duology, it's like, "Oh, he's oldest and all these different layers to him." Empire of the Hand is still just the Empire. It just happens to have some Chiss technology and some Chiss mannerisms. Not really like a, "Hey, we're anti-fascist. Hey, we're, like, really trying to help people out." It's like, "No, we're, like, an active force trying to keep all these threats in the Outer Rim and the unknown regions at bay." If we do whatever's necessary, right? So I think I can see why the Imperial Apology is steeped in more and more. It just gets weird that by the time of legacy comics being established, you kind of have to assume at some point that a Skywalker's has not only been married but had generations of family that would have formed Imperial Knights and all that. And it's as much as I like those characters, Imperial Knights as a concept, I don't necessarily like that it all kind of leads from a Jaina Solo marriage.
And then for me, going back to the point about the prequels intersecting with a lot of the later book initiatives as well. Like, I feel like we're seeing that happen again right now with the High Republic. It's just
Mhm.
everywhere. And I think it is when you do it so much, not only does it feel like a gimmick, it is just a way of promoting things. It's like
Yeah.
everything is High Republic related. Doesn't have to be like kind of ultimately even some of the story of something like Jedi Survivor, which I really liked. The High Republic connections were minimal in most of the story, and then
Yeah.
some of the big things they wanted to keep worked better. So it is kind of the nature of these interconnective stories, and I think whatever's popular or current, they're always going to go back to and add. I don't really have a problem with the prequel trilogy coming back. I mean, I think the Mortis stuff was very really niche to bring back as a big
Yeah.
basis for Fate of the Jedi. Like, because even in Clone Wars, when season 3 of Clone Wars was coming out, it wasn't Clone Wars what it is now. Not just in terms of quality, but in viewership. Like most of the people watching season 3 of Clone Wars were us when we were like 12. You know, most of the people watching Clone Wars were probably 8 to 12-year-olds. And didn't really get that following of like this show actually is there for adults until I would say probably end of season 4 when Maul came back, maybe season 5. That's when it really hit, and then once it got on Netflix in 2014, then it really took off. So it was always interesting to tie it so directly to the Clone Wars. But I think bringing back prequel ideology is something I really wish they did more in the sequels, just connecting the whole world rather than just
Yeah.
focusing on one side. But yeah, I think I'm feeling that same type of tedium with the High Republic, where like you get this new manga and you can't even escape the High Republic. Oh, it's a blade, but from the High Republic. Like it's just constantly everywhere. Something like the Acolyte doesn't really need to be tied to the High Republic at all. It takes place 100 years after. Like Vernestra doesn't need to be in it. There's After watching the season, there's no real reason it needs to be connected. Then you have Jedi Survivor. You have all the mangas. You have this and that. Everything is High Republic now, and I liked it at first, but now it is getting very tiring. It's like do it when it's natural, do it when it fits, and not
Yeah.
necessarily specifically to be a gimmick. So I agree on that point. Father Karras says that's the next. Yeah, Father Karras says producing suits JJ better. Demimond was the show that was dropped by David Zaslav and Warner Brothers. He's putting it at or he's good at putting together a cast. I'll give him that. But his Portal project has been on there for a long, long time, like closer to when Portal 2 came out rather than today. Yeah, I mean all these video games have gotten announcements. Like the Halo show wasn't that Spielberg for a long time. And then it came out in a completely different form with the helmetless Master Chief. That was a nightmare. But anyway, yeah, I don't think a lot of those are going to come out. Portal actually says, I think Portal said in development. I closed that window. But there are most of the things JJ's involved with currently on his IMDb page all say in development, which means basically it's just been talked about. Uh, when you go on IMDb, you want to see at least in pre-production. Much better is in production, and much better than that is in post-production because that means it's actually been shot. So yeah, we're never gonna get that Portal show. We're never gonna get half these video game adaptations. Like a Half-Life. You really think they're gonna make Half-Life now at this point when we haven't had Half-Life in forever? And even the newest Half-Life game, the VR one, Alex, was now what, like 5 years ago at this point. So yeah, I don't think they're gonna make those. It would have to coincide with a gigantic release. Uh,
Yeah, just one point about the show Demimond. Yeah, I totally forgot it. That was one of the ones that he was developing as like the centerpiece of his work. I believe he was asking for 200 million per season, which is more than Game of Thrones. So yeah, JJ's been asking for a lot of money and past his development, and he's never really given anything that feels like any of these studio heads, especially with the stream bubble burst, would want to like invest in even more for. So yeah, they gave him a lot of money for nothing so far. That's kind of what it all seems like.
Critical Thinker says, "What do you think of the fact that Zahn has said they're apparently firmly against Mara coming back?" And maybe they've told him that. I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming. I'm not going to say he's not telling the truth, so I'm sure they've said that to him. But it probably is more specifically directed at his books than anything. I
Yeah.
still don't think they're ever going to bring her back as much as I would hope they would, because I think it would help a lot of the story with The Last Jedi, a lot of the exile for Luke. I think it would be significantly an improvement to give Luke something to ground him. But I would not be shocked that they say no, don't put her in your books, don't reference her in your Thrawn trilogy, don't have any connections to her possibly coming back because we don't want to get the fandom hope. Doesn't mean they won't ever do it, but I'm sure they have been explicit to him about not trying to lead people on, because even in this new book, Reign of the Empire, there are a couple names dropped from Legends that are
Mhm.
now confirmed to be canon, which are kind of cool. But those ones are a little easier to work around. Amara Jade would be a gigantic bomb. It would be covered on every news site. It would be huge, even if she was just name dropped. So yeah, you can't. I'm sure they've been explicit to him specifically on you can't bring her back now. Doesn't mean I still don't buy that at 100% they'd rule out any storyline for Star Wars because they still I firmly believe they have no idea what they're doing with those characters. I don't think they know. I don't think they care to know. I think right now all they care about is how do we make our Mandalorian universe work and what few things can we fit Han, Luke, and Leia in that will work and get people excited for those movies without actually having to tackle those stories. So I really don't think they've committed to anything. So Mara would be something they would have to decide on after they figure out what they're going to do with Luke.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's key. Luke has to be established literally the entire original trilogy, 3 plus Lando, who honestly probably has gotten a little bit more work because he's at least showed up in, the comics and books and something as important as Shadow of the Sith that's close to the sequel trilogy. But yeah, we don't really know anything about the original trilogy cast past the Battle of Jakku comic, which Segura's gotta do some work for his, mainline stars to kinda make it all work. It's like, "Oh, maybe it was the Praetor character that they show at the very end there that's telling the story wrong, and it's not 100% accurate, just that it did happen later after the events of Aftermath where they're like, 'We should have been at this battle, but we're not,' right? You gotta work with that retcon. It was a messy, continuity for that series. It's probably one of the worst, honestly, Canon has ever had to do, but that's really all we got. That and then deepfake Luke and that's it, right? So it's like, okay, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna make this all like work out here for Luke, for these characters? And then you have to get Mara. And I don't think I think he said that they're against her coming back. Maybe just in like the way that things are currently laid out, they're like, no, we don't want to suddenly have to like work around the books, right? Like as much as all of canon is supposed to be unified, you still want your visually based franchise that was thrived in movies and TV shows to kind of lead the way for most of the storytelling, and then the books and all that can continue, and games can let her have like moments like she does have with the I'm blanking on, is it Jedi Knight 2, the one that has a little pack expansion pack with her?
Yeah,
Um,
Mysteries of
so
the
you
Sith.
yeah, so you can start doing stuff like that. But like I don't think even if we get Mara, I expect to see improvements honestly. Because if you actually think about it, those first 10 years of Mara, like chronologically in the Bantam era, right, between her appearance in Heir to the Empire and her, work in Survivor's Quest and all that, and it's just she's not around the Academy at all. She like comes and goes as she wants. She has a purple lightsaber once. She has a blue lightsaber once. Like it's there's no real like sense of Mara other than she pops in whenever she wants to, and she's still about like a smuggler here and there. She's still kind of doing things with her old Imperial skills. It's only after we get to New Jedi Order is she like actually entrenched with everybody. So you can significantly shrink that time period. You can make it 3, 4 years, still have plenty of stories, actually do more for that early relationship, and then get her to the timeline where she has a little bit more of an influence on the temple and maybe she gets killed by Snoke or something like that and still manage to give them a 20 plus year relationship. It's all there timeline wise to fit out, and I think there can be improvements to it, especially your earlier story. But yeah, I mean, it's all to be determined. Like, can you imagine if they bring her, they kill her, and she's like pregnant with like who could have been canon Ben Skywalker or something? Like, yeah, that would definitely help Luke's characterization a lot. Now, unfortunately, you're fridging her again, but it seems a little inevitable with the character, with how she was handled the first time around too.
Caleb Richardson says it's really weird being in this lull period for a lot of franchises. I feel like from 2021 to 2023, we had a crap ton of projects coming up from a ton of franchises. Aside from Marvel, which I feel will have its own lull period after Secret Wars, there's definitely more time between projects, which I don't mind. Quality over quantity, though I guess Marvel went through a semi lull period last year with only one MCU movie and like three shows. But anyway, Star Wars, it just fuels my impatience going back to normal with release dates being longer apart. Like I remember having like 3 or 4 shows in 1 year a couple of years ago. I think we're getting what 2 projects this year, the final season of Andor and the final season of Visions. I mean, the Acolyte is technically considered the tail end of the High Republic. Okay, that's a different point. Um, yeah, as for the lull period, it's purely just because the content's been bad, Caleb. Like, like bluntly putting it, or at least not as good as it usually is or has been. So the combination of the pandemic, the strikes, and the content not being great, both Marvel and Star Wars has just taken a step back and been like, we got to figure out how to make everything good again, which, like you're saying, quality over quantity. That's the Bob Iger mindset currently, since Disney's also had the upheaval of Iger leaving, Chapek coming in, then Iger coming back. So they've had a lot of internal upheaval and change. It's really all those things. But I'm with you on the fact that it is weird getting used to that. I mean, as Star Wars YouTubers, we kind of rely on content to be able to have new things to talk about. So when there's no new content, it is weird because we've, started our channel in 2021. And since then, we've had Bad Batch have 3 seasons. We had Visions have two going on 3 seasons. We've had Book of Boba Fett. We've had Obi-Wan. We've had Andor 2 seasons. We've had Mandalorian season 3. We had Acolyte and Skeleton Crew. We've had so many things come out that it's gonna be weird, especially if at Celebration this year they don't announce anything. Like if they don't announce anything and it's the next show isn't till Ahsoka next year, season 2, that'll be the biggest gap for sure for Star Wars content we've had since Disney got Star Wars. Because even between the sequel movies, there was Rebels, and then there was Resistance, and there were the spin-offs, and just yeah. So we've been inundated with content. It does feel like we're going a little bit more back towards where we were when under George Lucas, but it's not fun to get these lulls, but I think it is overall a positive because we can hope at least that they're taking a lot of the criticism that they've seen. They're taking a lot of the things that people have not liked about Star Wars projects recently, and they've said, "Hey, let's try to implement change. Let's try to do something different instead of just putting out the same old thing every single time and it getting 4, 5, 6 out of 10s every single time, and everybody being kind of unhappy with the general state of mediocrity of the content we've been getting." But yeah, I think, and as for Marvel went through their low last year, and I think that's the big one. A lot of the stuff you're seeing come out this year, Thunderbolts, Captain America, those were things that were completely retooled. They were supposed to come out last year, and they were retooled so that they could come out this year in a better form once Bob Iger came in, and he allowed them to take that time. So for Marvel, you're really going to start seeing the changes this year. You're going to start seeing what their new strategy is. And then with Fantastic Four, that should be the first movie that's completely start and finished under the new regime with the new philosophy. And I think with Marvel too, with the upheaval about Kang and all that stuff, they've had to refigure out what their direction is and where they're going. And I think right now, with the rumors completely being around the fact that they're all in on mutants after Secret Wars, I don't think we will get much of a lull. I think they're going to be ready this time. Unlike
Yeah.
unlike 2019 to 2020, where they thought, okay, maybe we need to give people some cooling off time between Endgame and whatever we do next for the MCU, and then boom, you get the pandemic, and then it changes everything, and they put a lot more of their focus on streaming then than they did films, and then the pandemic happened, and then it was all kind of a mess. This time, I think they're going to be prepared for that because that was a major flaw last time. So I'm assuming this time they'll be like, okay, now we know what our next phase is, even when Secret Wars ends. Because with the whole Kang saga now, it basically feels like phase 4 of the MCU was just this like empty filler period. Like did it amount to anything? If Ant-Man Quantumania is now the finale of Kang, like that's a kind of an unfortunate way of looking at phase 4. It really just makes it like something you can completely skip. So I think I don't anticipate another lull, and I don't anticipate a lull with Star Wars for a while. I think this will be our lull between this year once Andor ends and next year when Mandalorian and Grogu starts. And I think after that they're going to be at least more certain of their plan. Whether it's good or bad, we will see. But I think they're at least going to be more certain of their plan and their future.
Yeah, and I'd say the only thing I'd wanna mention to that quality versus quantity thing, Chapek came from the straight to VHS department. He's the guy who kinda created the idea of, like, doing sequels to so much of the classic 2D animated stuff, and then he's like, "Yeah, let's just make it straight to VHS sequels," like the 2 and a halves and all this and that. Oh, man. So, that same mentality he kinda brought to streaming. More and more and more, right? Like, instead of, like, does it make sense to do that? I wonder if, like, some certain naming conventions could have changed with, like, Book of Boba Fett, I think is a decent name, but Ahsoka, I don't know if Ahsoka makes sense for how much she's just a character in the story. If it was, like, Heir to the Empire or, like, something new, like, leading up, I think people would have, even seen it even more, right? So, those kind of things where it's like, does it even make sense title-wise? Does it even make sense to have this many shows? Yeah, definitely affected Marvel even more than it ever did Star Wars, but we're done with that. We're done with the 2020 slate that was like a bunch of projects that even Kathleen Kennedy's like, "We're not ready for any of these." Like a droid story, sure, we'll talk about it, but what does that mean? It's just like an idea floated around probably. So, yeah, I think we're now that we're finally at the end of that 2020 slate, like Liam said, I think we're kind of set up here for things to change and be a little bit more retooled and focused for old Disney's franchises. 2023 was a bad year for them. The Wish was a terrible film for them for their 100th anniversary, and yet you're seeing that they've knocked it out of the park throughout 2024, right? They're like, "Oh my god, we're on top of the world now. What's going on?" 23, oh boy. 25, now hopefully those changes are all coming for all its franchises, um, just like it has for some so far. So yeah, Chapek unfortunately also even ruined the parks for a lot of people. So Disney's working on a lot of things here, and the parks were guaranteed money makers, and he messed around with that too. So yeah, I think as much as I don't love that we've kind of had to revert to Iger 100%, I, we're in a better position with a second round of him than having Chapek if he were still CEO today.
Yeah, JPEG was ruining the parks for a long time. And yeah. Anyway, that's gonna wrap it up for tonight's stream, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We've reached about 2 hours, so we're gonna call it a night here. Again, to remind everyone, no stream on Tuesday. Do not expect a stream on Tuesday. The next stream, if it happens, will be a week from Tuesday. Keep an eye out on the live and the posts. We'll let you know if those streams are happening the 2 weeks I am out of town. But don't worry, there's going to be plenty of content still out while I'm out of town. I have worked ahead, got a lot of videos scheduled for you guys. Another reason to subscribe to our Patreon YouTube membership. There's a lot of things scheduled right now for patrons and members only that you can check out. We also have coming up here our review of Reign of the Empire, talking about books a lot on tonight's stream. Our review of Reign of the Empire, The Mask of Fear, will be out here in the next few weeks. And if you are a patron or YouTube member, you get to watch it early whenever it goes up. So check that out, as well as all of our other videos that are going to be coming out throughout the last few weeks. We just posted yesterday our newest tier list. If you guys are interested in that, it's a ranking of all the Star Wars posters, a little different topic. It was pretty fun to discuss. Hopefully, you guys enjoy that one. Also, if you're interested in books, Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader review went up last week as well, if you want to check that out. And my bookshelf tour the week before that, if you haven't checked that one out. So keep an eye out for all that content. Shorts will still be 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every single week, as well as community polls. All of that's still going. So keep an eye out on Star Wars Lads, even if the lives do take the step back here for the next few weeks. All the other content will still be going, and then we will be back in a couple weeks. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I will see you all in a couple of weeks. Sanak might see you next week. All right, everybody. Good night. Have a great rest of your week and your weekend. Enjoy the Super Bowl tomorrow.